The story begins in the remote highlands of Central Europe, where the wind always seems to whisper through the crumbling stones of an ancient monastery. Locals call it the sanctuary of St. Ilias, but very few say the name without glancing over their shoulders. It stands alone on a cliffside, isolated, weather-beaten, its shadow stretching long and thin across the valley like a hand reaching for something it lost long ago. From the outside, it appears peaceful. A place built for prayer, silence, and spiritual retreat. But for centuries, villagers who live in the nearby settlements have believed something else entirely, that the monastery watches them back. They tell stories of strange lights flickering from underground windows that should not exist, of pilgrims who entered the monastery seeking salvation and were never seen again, of monks who moved through the hallways not like men of God, but like keepers of a forbidden gate. Even today, travelers who pass near the monastery describe the same unsettling feeling, that the building itself is listening. Observing. Waiting. The Church, of course, denies all of this. Official records describe the sanctuary as a historically unremarkable site, home to quiet monks dedicated to contemplation and charity. But unofficial accounts, whispered, suppressed, or lost, tell of something much darker. Something ancient. Something that did not begin with the Church, but learned to hide beneath it. Our story opens with one such suppressed account. In 1884, a Vatican archivist named Matteo Fiorenzi reportedly stumbled upon a sealed wooden box buried deep within the restricted section of the church archives. The box was wrapped in blackened cloth and marked with a wax seal depicting a symbol not recognized in any official ecclesiastical design, a single eye, encircled by thorns. According to Fiorenzi's notes, when he broke the seal, he found inside a stack of brittle parchment pages, confessions, testimonies, and disciplinary reports dating back to the late 1700s. One of those pages carried a confession so disturbing, Fiorenzi claimed he felt the air turn cold as he read it. The confession began with a line that would shape every investigation that followed: "Forgive me, Father, for I walked among them." No name. No signature. No date. Just those words, words heavy with implication, words suggesting the writer had not only witnessed something forbidden, but had participated in it. Fiorenzi's attempts to learn more met immediate resistance. Within a week, he was removed from his archival post. 2 weeks later, he vanished from public record altogether. His disappearance was never officially investigated. The confession page was quietly resealed and buried once again in the archives, where it would not resurface until decades later. But even without the confession, the monastery's history carried enough shadows to raise questions. Travelers in the 17th and 18th centuries wrote about strange nocturnal chants that drifted from the monastery long after evening prayers should have ended. One 1732 journal from a merchant caravan describes a procession of hooded figures, carrying lanterns that dimmed rather than brightened the night. Another account, this one from a frightened shepherd, claims he once saw a group of monks escorting a pale, trembling man toward a stone doorway behind the monastery, a doorway that later could not be found. And throughout all of these centuries, one pattern remained constant: people disappeared. Not in large numbers, not enough to provoke widespread panic, but enough to form a chilling pattern. A traveler here, a penitent pilgrim there, all quietly swallowed by the sanctuary of St. Ilias. The Church labeled these disappearances as misunderstandings, travel accidents, or fabricated village folklore. Yet whenever an investigation began, it ended abruptly. Files were sealed. Priests were reassigned. Witnesses retracted their statements, often tearfully, as if doing so was less a choice and more a necessity for their survival. So what exactly was being hidden? Some historians believed the monastery sheltered a secret order of monks who practiced a long-forgotten spiritual discipline. Others insisted it was a prison for heretics. A few, in hushed tones, suggested something stranger, that beneath the monastery lay a chamber older than the church itself, a place where rituals of purification were performed. But the truth remained elusive, until one final detail resurfaced. Inside Fiorenzi's sealed box, along with the confession, was a single hand-drawn map of the monastery. A map showing a room that did not exist in any official blueprint. A room buried beneath the chapel floor. A room simply labeled, the chamber. And with that, the first question emerges, one that echoes across centuries: what exactly was the church hiding beneath its own foundations, and why did so many never return? The first disappearance recorded within the sanctuary of St. Ilias did not begin as a mystery. It began as a mistake, at least, that's what the church insisted for more than a century. But the truth, as it would later unfold, suggests something far more deliberate, and far more horrifying. In the winter of 1791, the monastery welcomed a young novice named Brother Leon Varga, a quiet, soft-spoken man from a neighboring village. Leon was known for his gentle temperament and unwavering desire to devote his life to faith. For the monks, he was the perfect recruit, obedient, humble, and eager to begin the routine of prayer and discipline. But within just 3 months of his arrival, Leon vanished without a trace. At first, the monks believed he had simply wandered off the grounds during his evening meditation. The valley was dangerous in winter, with steep cliffs and sudden fogs. Many assumed he had slipped, fallen, and died somewhere in the ravine below. But when a search party was assembled at dawn, there was no sign, no footprints, no torn fabric, no blood, no broken branches. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Leon's older sister, Eva Varga, arrived at the monastery a week later, frantic and angry. She demanded answers, insisting her brother would never abandon his vows, never flee without leaving a message, and certainly never leave her to worry. The monks avoided her eyes as they spoke. Their words felt rehearsed. They claimed Leon must have run away due to spiritual doubt. Eva didn't accept that, not for a second. While staying at the guest house near the monastery, Eva discovered something the monks had conveniently omitted. A stable boy confessed that, on the night Leon disappeared, he had seen candlelight flickering inside the old stone cloister, a place that had supposedly been sealed for decades due to structural decay. He also mentioned hearing voices, low and rhythmic, echoing off the surrounding walls long after the monastery's nightly prayer had ended. Eva pushed further, questioning everyone she could find. Some monks refused to speak. Others whispered half-formed warnings, their lips trembling, as if they feared being overheard. There are things here that do not forgive questions. Let your brother rest in God's hands. Some doors must remain closed. Still, Eva refused to give up. Late one night, she slipped into Leon's cell, hoping to find a clue he might have left behind. The room was small, bare stone, a single cot, a wooden cross pinned above it, and a writing desk. The candles had been removed, as if to discourage her from lingering. But Eva was determined. She ran her fingers along the edges of the desk, searching for hidden notes or letters. That's when she found it. Carved into the underside of the desk, so faintly it was nearly invisible, was a strange symbol. A circle, split in half by a vertical line, with 3 smaller lines fanning outward like rays. Eva had never seen anything like it. When she confronted the monks, they insisted she was imagining things. But their sudden panic, their attempts to usher her out of the room, told her otherwise. Later, a groundskeeper secretly approached Eva, his face pale, as if he had spent hours debating whether to reveal what he knew. He explained that Leon had been asking too many questions about a forbidden gathering that supposedly took place within the monastery every winter solstice, a gathering that the church denied existed. According to rumor, only a select group of senior monks attended. They wore unmarked robes, carried lanterns painted with ash, and descended into a part of the monastery no one else was allowed to enter. Leon had discovered this by accident. And then, he began looking for proof. The groundskeeper claimed that Leon had been warned. Not gently. They told him, curiosity is the enemy of salvation. They told him, some truths demand sacrifice. They told him, those who witness the ritual do not return unchanged. Eva felt her stomach twist as the man spoke. Each word confirmed her worst fear: Leon's disappearance was not an accident. It was a silencing. Still, she needed evidence. Something solid. Something undeniable. She persuaded the groundskeeper to take her to Leon's last known location. He brought her to the rear courtyard, a barren place where the stone walls absorbed sound and the wind carried whispers. At the center was the entrance to the old cloister, sealed off by a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. The door looked untouched, yet Eva could feel something cold radiating from its surface, as if it had been recently disturbed. The groundskeeper admitted that on the night Leon vanished, the door had been open. A dim, reddish light flickered from inside, and he heard chanting that made his skin crawl. By morning, the door was locked again, and Leon was gone. Eva demanded the door be opened. The monks refused. They threatened to call authorities, claiming she was disrupting sacred property. But just as they forced her off the grounds, she swore she heard something from behind the cloister door, something faint, almost unreal. A chant, rhythmic and repetitive. And beneath it, a scream. Short. Sharp. Cut off mid-breath. A chill ran through Eva's body. She knew, with absolute certainty, that her brother had not simply disappeared. He had been taken. Taken by someone inside the monastery. Taken into a chamber the church swore did not exist. Taken into a ritual no one survived. And the last thing she ever found in Leon's belongings, the carved symbol, matched an exact description in a banned ecclesiastical manuscript she uncovered years later, the mark of the veiled apostles. Eva's nightmare was only the beginning. For decades, whispers had circulated among villagers and lower-ranking clergy about an unseen hierarchy within the sanctuary of St. Ilias. A brotherhood inside the brotherhood. A silent order that operated beneath vows, beyond scripture, and outside the authority of Rome itself. At first, such tales seemed like superstition, stories born from fear, suspicion, and the monastery's isolating presence. But the more researchers dug into the records surrounding the monastery, the more undeniable the pattern became: something had taken root there centuries ago, something the church never intended to acknowledge. The earliest clues surfaced during the Crusades. As European armies marched across foreign lands, a handful of clergy found themselves exposed not just to war, but to ideas and rituals the church had long forbidden. Some returned with fractured beliefs. Others returned with new obsessions. And a select few, those with influence, charisma, and unwavering ambition, returned with a vision. These men believed salvation could only be achieved through suffering. Not symbolic suffering, not spiritual suffering, but physical, deliberate ordeals meant to strip the soul bare and force divine revelation. Their ideology was radical, dangerous, and completely incompatible with the Church's teachings. Yet they found followers, men who believed that pain cleansed, that fear purified, and that survival of sacred trials marked the chosen. This ideology eventually crystallized into a clandestine sect that called itself the Veiled Apostles. No one knows their exact founding date. Their early records are fragmented, written in coded symbols or buried in private journals that scholars only discovered centuries later. But what is certain is that by the early 1700s, the Veiled Apostles had already infiltrated monasteries across the region, embedding themselves in positions of authority where they could recruit selectively and operate without interference. Their center of activity, however, was the sanctuary of St. Ilias. It is believed the apostles chose the monastery for two reasons. First, its isolation protected them from scrutiny. Second, the building's foundations were older than the church itself, constructed atop a pre-Christian site once used for rituals of purification and soul division. Whatever the apostles sought, whatever they believed lay beneath those stones, fit perfectly with their evolving doctrine. Historians uncovered scattered accounts from monks who tried to escape the order or expose them. One such account came from a scribe who wrote that certain monks wore two faces, one of peace, one of judgment. Another journal described a group of senior clergy who disappeared into underground passages late at night, emerging before dawn with eyes, glossed by visions no mortal should behold. Those few who managed to smuggle their fears into writing always mentioned the same thing: a ritual. A trial. A selection process. The veiled apostles believed that once every generation, a worthy soul must be tested. The test was not metaphorical. Participants were subjected to a series of ordeals designed to confront their deepest fears, break their sense of self, and force them into a state of uncontrollable vulnerability. The apostles believed that only by reaching this point, standing at the brink of death, could a man glimpse the realm of the divine. But the purpose of the ritual was not enlightenment. It was recruitment. Those who survived, if anyone ever did, were said to be elevated, reshaped, and indoctrinated into the apostles' inner circle. But over centuries of research, one detail remained painfully consistent across all surviving testimonies: no one survived. Whether by design or consequence, the ritual claimed every life it touched. Yet the apostles performed it again and again, convinced they were one sacrifice away from unveiling a divine truth. The Vatican received scattered rumors about the cult but dismissed most as exaggerations or slander. Some reports, however, were too detailed to ignore. One particularly disturbing file, declassified only in the late 1990s, contained a translation of an intercepted apostles' manuscript. The text was smeared, incomplete, but one portion stood out vividly: only one may enter the chamber. Many will try. None shall return. This line alone hinted at the ritual's lethal nature, but what followed was even more unsettling. The manuscript described the chamber, an underground sanctum designed not as a place of worship, but as a psychological crucible. The air within was said to induce hallucinations, the markings on the walls triggered disorientation, and the structure itself amplified fear. Scholars believe the apostles engineered the chamber's conditions to simulate a descent into divine judgment. But the question persisted: how did the apostles operate so freely under the Church's nose? The answer lay in power. Many of the veiled apostles were not simple monks, they were scholars, strategists, and high-ranking clergy with access to church resources and authority. Their influence protected them. Complaints vanished. Accusers were reassigned. Files were edited. In some cases, witnesses to the rituals were declared mentally unstable and locked away in remote hospitals where they died without ever giving public testimony. Over time, the apostles' existence faded from official history. But not from memory. Villagers continued telling stories of hooded monks reciting prayers that were not prayers at all. Travelers spoke of figures in the dark carrying lanterns with symbols carved into the glass, symbols later matched to apostle manuscripts. And deep inside the monastery, monks spoke in hushed tones of rooms that had no doors, hallways that led to dead ends, and a presence that permeated the air during the winter solstice. The final confirmation came from a document found hidden behind a false panel in a monastery library, likely concealed by a frightened monk. The parchment referenced the veiled apostles directly, describing them as a brotherhood cloaked in sanctity, but bound to a doctrine of shadows. It warned that their influence had become so pervasive that to challenge them was to invite disappearance. The last lines of the document were etched with shaking hands: I stood among them once. I saw what the chamber demands. God forgive us all. With this revelation, the existence of the veiled apostles was no longer a rumor, it was a fact. And the same question that haunted Leon Vargas' sister now echoed louder: what exactly happened inside the chamber that no one survived? Long before investigators set foot inside the sanctuary of St. Ilias, the villagers already spoke of something hidden beneath it, something older than the monastery, older even than the church itself. They called it the Stone Belly, a place where voices echoed even when no one was there, where the air felt thick with the weight of unspoken truths. For centuries, monks denied its existence. But the truth always finds a crack to slip through. Architectural historians studying the monastery in the late 1800s noticed an inconsistency in its foundation layout. The surface structure was built in a perfect cross formation, but underground tunnels hinted at a design far more complex. A team of engineers later confirmed that several hidden passages had been sealed, deliberately, and with remarkable precision. These sealed tunnels formed shapes resembling concentric circles converging on a point that did not correspond to any known chamber above ground. That point became known as the chamber. Rumors suggested that only the veiled apostles had access to it. Some monks claimed they had heard footsteps late at night, soft, deliberate, descending stone steps that led nowhere on the official map. Others spoke of torches disappearing behind walls that should have been solid. But the more the monks talked, the more they were punished. Fear eventually silenced them. The modern world might never have learned about the chamber at all, if not for a series of blueprints uncovered in 1912. A visiting structural engineer, commissioned to evaluate the monastery after a minor earthquake, found a folded parchment hidden inside a damaged support column. The parchment was faintly burned at the edges, likely hidden quickly during a time of danger. It depicted an elaborate subterranean structure, spirals of hallways, angled floors, and strange alcoves designed to distort sound and light. One note scribbled in the margin read, "Walls must remain uneven. Symmetry weakens the effect." Engineers puzzled over this. What effect? Why intentionally construct a space to disorient the senses? Further analysis suggested the chamber was designed to manipulate perception. The walls were angled to create echo patterns that made footsteps seem closer or farther than they truly were. Small slits carved into the stone allowed drafts to whistle through, creating ghostly tones. Certain corners amplified whispers. Some absorbed them entirely. Psychologists would later describe this as an early form of sensory manipulation, an environment engineered for psychological breakdown. But none of this compared to the testimony of those who described the chamber's entrance. A surviving diary entry from a monk in 1816 spoke of a staircase leading down from behind the chapel altar. The staircase itself was short, but the descent felt longer, as if time slowed the deeper one went. At the bottom stood a heavy stone door, sculpted with symbols worn smooth by centuries of touch. These symbols matched the markings found in Leon Varga's cell, the same markings associated with the veiled apostles. The monk wrote that when the door opened, the air inside trembled. Not moved. Trembled. As if the chamber breathed. His final lines were almost unreadable, written with such haste the ink bled across the page, "They are calling for another. God help whoever is chosen." What happened inside the chamber remained speculation until the 20th century, when a team of researchers attempted a partial investigation. They were allowed only limited access, permission granted by the church after decades of pressure. But even with restrictions, what they found confirmed every nightmare whispered about the place. Descending into the lower tunnels, the researchers noted temperature fluctuations, unnatural ones. The deeper they moved, the colder the air became, yet no source of cold existed. Their breath fogged, their lamps flickered, and their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. One researcher described the sensation as walking into a memory that does not want to be remembered. Then they found the chamber's outer door. It was sealed, but the stone around it bore faint scorch marks, as if torches had scraped against it during hurried rituals. The floor was carved in patterns, circles within circles, intersecting lines, and repeated symbols that matched apostolic manuscripts. In the center, a larger symbol had been chiseled away completely, as if someone feared what knowledge it might reveal. The team tried to document everything, but audio recordings became distorted the closer they got. Static bled into the microphones. Rhythmic pulses interrupted the tape, pulses that matched no mechanical interference. Still, the team persisted, attempting to capture 1 minute of sound from behind the stone door. What they recorded became one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. At first, there was only silence. Then a faint humming, low, cyclical, almost mechanical. But gradually, within that hum, something else emerged. A pattern. A cadence. A voice. No. Not one voice. Several. They whispered in unison, speaking a language none of the team recognized. The tone was urgent, layered, and unmistakably human. One researcher claimed the voices sounded as if they were just on the other side of the stone, waiting. But the recording ended abruptly with a scraping sound, metal against stone, and then a final whisper, isolated and close to the microphone, as if spoken directly into it, "Someone else is down here." The team fled the tunnels. They never returned. The church shut down the investigation the next day, citing safety concerns. All recordings were confiscated. The chamber was declared structurally unstable and sealed once again, this time with reinforced barriers. But rumors persisted that some researchers later claimed they saw shadows behind the stone door, shadows that moved even when the torches did not. One swore he saw a figure standing in the far corner of the tunnel, just beyond the reach of the light, its posture rigid, as if it had been waiting centuries for someone to come back. And so the chamber remained an unanswered question, buried by stone, protected by silence, and feared even by those who believed in nothing supernatural. But one truth lingered like a cold breath in the dark: whatever had happened inside the chamber had left an echo. And that echo was not done calling. For centuries, the veiled apostles guarded their greatest secret with a devotion bordering on madness, the ritual performed inside the chamber. Whispers of it drifted through the monastery like smoke, thin, suffocating, impossible to grasp. Some claimed it was a test of purity. Others said it was a judgment. A few believed it was a doorway to something divine, or something pretending to be divine. Whatever the truth was, one fact remained unchallenged: no one who entered the chamber ever walked out alive. Understanding the ritual requires returning to the ideology that birthed it. The apostles believed that the human soul could be divided, stripped of its worldly attachments, carved down to its raw, trembling essence. Only by facing absolute terror, by surrendering to darkness without resistance, could a person earn revelation. But the revelation they sought was not enlightenment. It was submission. And submission required breaking a person completely. The ritual was divided into 3 stages, each designed to erode the participants' identity, sanity, and will. Survivors, if such a term could even be used, would emerge not as themselves, but as vessels shaped by the apostles' doctrine. In practice, however, no one ever completed all 3 stages. Most perished before the second even began. Accounts of the ritual come from forbidden journals, smuggled notes, and rare confessions whispered on deathbeds. Each account is incomplete, fragmented, pieces of a nightmare scattered across centuries. But when these pieces are assembled, a horrifying picture emerges. The first stage was known as the unbinding. The participant was taken from their cell in the dead of night, blindfolded, drugged, and escorted through the monastery's hidden passages. They were forced to kneel before the chamber door while the apostles chanted in a circular formation around them. Witnesses described the chants as rhythmic and hypnotic, monks moving in perfect unison, their voices rising and falling like a tide. The purpose of the chant was twofold: to weaken the participants' resolve, and to signal the beginning of the ordeal to something inside the chamber. Once the door opened, the participant was pushed inside. The chamber was always kept pitch black. No torches. No lamps. Only silence, broken by the faint hum embedded in the stone itself. The blindness ensured the mind became the battlefield, forcing the participant into confrontation with their own fears. Some lasted hours. Others panicked immediately, clawing at the door until their fingers bled. They were never let out. The second stage was the confrontation. Very little is known about what happened inside the chamber during this phase, but fragments of testimony hint at a horrifying pattern. Participants heard whispers, but not from the apostles. These whispers rose from the walls, from the floor, from the dark air pressing around them. Some claimed the voices mimicked their loved ones. Others said the voices accused them of sins they had never committed. The chamber played tricks on the mind, warping memory and emotion until the participant could no longer distinguish reality from hallucination. But the most disturbing testimonies described something else: a presence. A figure, or perhaps several, moving in the darkness. Never touching, never speaking directly, but always there. Watching. Studying. Waiting. Some participants attempted to fight it. Some begged for mercy. Some tried to pray. All eventually succumbed to panic, collapsing on the floor as the chamber crushed their sense of self. Only one testimony hints at physical contact. A banned manuscript from the early 1800s describes a participant who managed to scribble a message on his arm before collapsing: "They are not shadows." No one knows what that means. No one wants to. The third and final stage, the revealing, was the heart of the ritual. It required the participant to emerge from the chamber transformed, purified through fear, and ready to be accepted by the apostles. But this stage was merely theoretical. According to every known record, no participant ever lived long enough to reach it. When the chamber door opened at dawn, the apostles always found the same thing: a body. Sometimes curled in a fetal position. Sometimes sprawled across the carved floor. Sometimes with hands lifted toward the ceiling as if reaching for something unseen. The cause of death varied: heart failure, suffocation, self-inflicted wounds, but the expression on each face was identical. Wide eyes. Mouth frozen mid-scream. Terror so profound it remained etched into their features even in death. Yet the apostles did not consider these failures. They considered them offerings. But the ritual did not only claim the lives of monks and accused heretics. Over time, the apostles expanded their reach to villagers they deemed spiritually impure. Records tell of farmers dragged from their beds, young women accused of witchcraft, travelers who asked too many questions. These victims had no understanding of the ritual awaiting them. Their stories were erased. Their names removed from parish records. Their families told they had fled or died of illness. One such victim was a young shepherd named Thomas Veck. Local legends say Thomas wandered too close to the monastery one winter night and saw torchlight inside the sealed cloister. He also claimed to have heard chanting carried by the wind, chanting that did not resemble mass or prayer. The next morning, Thomas told his family what he heard. That same night, he vanished. 2 weeks later, a monk's journal recorded a ritual performed on a non-initiated subject, who collapsed before the second hour. The entry ended with a disturbing note: the chamber accepted him. What that meant remains unclear. The ritual's brutality would have remained hidden forever if not for a single document discovered in a forbidden archive, a personal testimony from a monk who had been forced to participate as an apostle observer. His final words, written moments before he poisoned himself, remain the most chilling account ever preserved: "I heard them chanting after I died." Scholars have debated this line endlessly. Was it metaphorical? A hallucination? A fragment of delirium? Or did the monk mean it literally, that the chamber continued chanting long after his mind had fractured, perhaps even after his soul had departed? Whatever the explanation, the message is clear: the ritual was not meant to test faith. It was meant to consume it. And as history would soon show, the apostles did not stop with Thomas. They had bigger plans. More victims. And eventually, their ritual would claim someone the Church could not ignore. By the early 1940s, the Vatican could no longer ignore the whispers surrounding the sanctuary of St. Ilias. Too many inconsistencies lingered in the monastery's records. Too many disappearances had been dismissed with superficial explanations. And the newly uncovered manuscripts hinting at the veiled apostles had forced uncomfortable questions to resurface within the highest ranks of the Church. They needed someone discreet, disciplined, and unwavering. Someone who would not be swayed by superstition or fear. They chose Father Aurelius Senko, a seasoned investigator known for exposing corruption within isolated parishes. Aurelius was respected for his intelligence and feared for his persistence. When he accepted the assignment, he did so with the belief that he was confronting a mere administrative irregularity. But by the time he reached the cold stone courtyard of the monastery, he sensed something deeper, something wrong. Aurelius arrived under the guise of conducting a routine spiritual audit. The monks greeted him with an eerie stiffness, bowing with rehearsed politeness but avoiding his eyes. Their smiles were hollow, their movements synchronized in a way that felt unsettling. Aurelius noticed immediately that no one walked alone. Every monk seemed paired, two figures gliding like mirrored shadows across the courtyard, whispering to each other in tones too low to decipher. During his first day, Aurelius conducted formal interviews with the monastery's leadership. The abbot, a frail man with trembling hands, insisted that the sanctuary was a place of peace. But Aurelius saw the fear in his eyes each time he mentioned the underground passages. When asked about past disappearances, the abbot deflected with pathetic excuses, lost travelers, misrecorded histories, local exaggerations. It was clear he was hiding something. The younger monks were worse. Their answers were identical, as if memorized: there is no secret order here. No rituals occur outside liturgy. We are devoted only to God. Yet while their mouths repeated these lines, their eyes betrayed panic. Some flinched when Aurelius mentioned the chamber. One monk refused to speak at all, gripping his rosary so tightly that the beads dug into his skin until blood pooled in his palm. Aurelius documented everything in a leather journal. Their words feel scripted. Their fear feels real. That night, he wandered through the monastery halls long after curfew. The corridors were dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old incense. As he passed the chapel, he heard something unusual, a faint hum, rhythmic and slow, vibrating through the stone. It resembled chanting, but too distorted to be human. When he pushed open the door, the sound abruptly stopped. The chapel was empty. The next morning, Aurelius inspected the monastery archives. The record-keeper allowed him access with visible reluctance, claiming many documents had been lost in a fire years earlier. But Aurelius quickly realized the truth: files had not been lost, they had been removed. Entire decades of monastery logs were missing, erased with surgical precision. Only small fragments remained, and most referenced events unrelated to the chamber or the veiled apostles. Except one. Aurelius found a faded disciplinary report from 1816 describing a monk who attempted to flee the sanctuary after learning of an unauthorized gathering. The monk claimed he heard chanting beneath the chapel floor. He vanished before a second interview could be conducted. The report abruptly ended with two words: case closed. Aurelius knew he was getting close. On his fourth night, he awoke to the sound of footsteps pacing outside his room. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. He approached the door, holding his breath, and listened. The footsteps stopped directly in front of him. He felt a presence on the other side of the wood, someone standing perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. But something was wrong inside his room. On the small wooden table where he kept his belongings, his journal lay open, not how he left it. A single line had been added that he did not write: "You are not meant to see the chamber." The handwriting was jagged, pressed so deeply into the paper that it scratched through. Aurelius felt cold dread rise up his spine. Someone had been inside while he slept. He refused to be intimidated. The next day, he confronted the abbot directly, demanding access to the sealed cloister rumored to lead underground. The abbot's reaction was immediate and desperate. He begged Aurelius to leave the monastery, insisting his presence was disturbing the peace and awakening old shadows. When Aurelius refused, the abbot threatened to revoke his access entirely. Aurelius walked away from the argument, but he didn't abandon his mission. He waited until midnight, then followed a monk who had been acting suspiciously since his arrival. The monk moved through the corridors with uncanny precision, carrying a lantern that cast long, warping shadows along the walls. Aurelius trailed behind him, careful not to make a sound. The monk slipped behind the chapel altar and pressed his hand against a specific stone tile. With a grinding rumble, a concealed doorway slowly opened. Aurelius watched with disbelief as the monk descended a staircase that should not have existed. He waited until the monk disappeared into the depths, then followed. The staircase was narrow, claustrophobic, spiraling downward into the earth. As Aurelius stepped deeper into the darkness, the air grew colder. His lantern flame flickered violently, as if trying to extinguish itself. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a long corridor carved from ancient stone. Symbols lined the walls, worn, cryptic, identical to those he had seen referenced in forbidden manuscripts. And then he heard it. Chanting. Not loud, but layered, voices interweaving like threads of a single terrifying melody. He followed the sound, heart racing, as the corridor opened into a vast subterranean chamber lit by torches. Hooded figures stood in a circle, their faces obscured, their hands raised toward a massive stone door pulsing faintly with warmth. This was the chamber. Aurelius had found it. Before he could retreat, two figures seized him from behind. Their grip was unnaturally strong. He struggled, kicking and clawing, but they dragged him forward, forcing him to his knees before the stone door. The chanting grew louder, vibrating through his bones. The abbot stepped forward from the circle. His face was hollow, his eyes empty. "You should not have come here," he whispered. Aurelius was thrown toward the door. As his palms hit the cold stone, a shock traveled through him, a pulse, as if the chamber itself recognized his presence. His final act, in those last frantic moments, was to reach into his coat and tear out a page from his journal, scribbling whatever he could before they pulled him away. The page was later found torn, stained with something dark, the ink smeared by trembling hands. It contained a single sentence: "The ritual has begun again." Father Aurelius Senko was never seen again. For generations, the church insisted that no one had ever survived the chamber. Official records were absolute, those taken into the ritual never returned. But as more hidden documents emerged and more forbidden testimonies resurfaced, a terrible truth revealed itself: some did return. They walked out of the chamber alive, yet they were not the same. Their minds fractured, their souls hollowed, their identities stripped until only a trembling shell remained. These people were known to the villagers as the returned, but within the monastery they were referred to as the failures, souls too weak to ascend, yet too strong to die. The apostles handled them with secrecy. Any who survived the night were hidden away, tucked into forgotten wings of the monastery or taken to remote ecclesiastical hospitals under fabricated diagnoses. Their existence was never acknowledged publicly. Their names were erased. But fragments of their stories survived, scribbled notes, whispered recollections, and, in the rarest cases, forbidden interviews recorded by those who refused to let history bury the truth. One of the earliest known survivors was a young woman named Mirela Cora, taken from her village in 1894 after rumors accused her of witchcraft. The accusation was absurd, nothing more than superstition fueled by jealousy, but it was enough for the apostles to mark her as a suitable subject. Her family searched for her for months, unaware that she had been dragged into the monastery's underground corridors and forced into the ritual. According to a smuggled medical report discovered decades later, Mirela emerged from the chamber at dawn, still breathing but unresponsive. Her hair had turned nearly white. Her heartbeat was erratic. Her eyes were fixed on something no one else could see. When a priest tried to pray over her, she began to scream, a raw, animalistic sound that echoed off the stone walls until several monks held her down. She did not recognize her own name. She did not speak. She did not sleep. Instead, she traced patterns on the stone floor with her fingers, patterns identical to the ritual markings carved beneath the monastery. It was as though the chamber had imprinted itself onto her, carved its symbols into her memory even as it shredded her sanity. Mirela was transferred to a convent infirmary far from the region. She lived for 9 more years, never uttering a single coherent word. Her final days were spent in a corner of a dimly lit cell, whispering to the wall as if someone whispered back. Her last recorded phrase chilled the nurse who heard it, "They follow those who escape." Another survivor, this one from 1837, was a monk named Brother Tomas Varick. His case was considered the most unusual because Brother Tomas had willingly volunteered for the ritual. Many monks feared the chamber, but Tomas believed he was destined for sainthood. He thought surviving the ritual would prove his divine calling. Instead, it shattered him. The moment the chamber door opened, the apostles found Tomas crawling toward the exit, his hands torn and bleeding from clawing at the carvings. His eyes darted wildly, his breath rapid and broken. When they approached, he recoiled as if they were diseased. He muttered constantly, but the only clear phrase he repeated was, "The shadows learned my name." Attempts to rehabilitate him failed. He screamed at the sight of darkness. He refused to sleep unless candles surrounded his bed. Even then, he would jolt awake throughout the night, insisting that something had entered the room during his dreams. His deterioration accelerated until he refused food, claiming the chamber had marked him and would not let him live long. He died within a year, his face twisted in terror. The attending physician wrote that Tomas appeared to have died mid-hallucination, as though something stood in front of him during his final breath. But perhaps the most chilling survivor account belongs to Isabel Merrick, a 22-year-old teacher from a nearby town who vanished in 1901. Her disappearance was never connected to the monastery until a forbidden ledger surfaced in the 1970s, revealing she had been taken for the ritual after challenging a priest's authority. The apostles justified her abduction by labeling her contaminated by rebellion. Isabel survived nearly 9 hours in the chamber. That alone made her exceptional. But when the door opened at dawn, what stepped out hardly resembled the woman who had entered. Her posture was rigid, her skin cold to the touch, her pupils dilated as though she had stared into absolute darkness for days. She spoke, but her voice had changed, it was hollow, monotone, as if her emotions had been drained. She repeatedly asked for a lantern, insisting she needed to see the edges. No one understood what she meant. When placed under supervision, Isabel wrote obsessively in a journal. Not words, symbols. Over and over, page after page, the same shapes that adorned the chamber walls. Her hands shook violently as she drew, but she never stopped until she collapsed from exhaustion. The most disturbing entry in her journal came on the final page. Instead of symbols, she wrote a single sentence, "They promised I would not return alone." Isabel vanished from her room the next night. The window was unbroken. The door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of struggle. Her bed appeared undisturbed, as if she had simply disappeared into the air. No one ever found her. The church suppressed these accounts for decades, insisting their fabrications would harm the faithful. But internal memos later revealed that high-ranking clergy had been aware of the survivors all along. They referred to them as interrupted ascensions. They documented their psychological deterioration. They tracked the pattern of symbols they drew. And most disturbingly, they noted similarities between survivors' hallucinations. Every single survivor, no matter the year, age, or background, reported sensing someone in the chamber with them. Not the apostles. Not other victims. Someone else. A presence that moved in the dark. A figure that never touched them, yet watched them. A whisper that followed them into the waking world. The survivors never lived long. Some died from shock, some by their own hands, some vanished without explanation. But their testimonies, fragmented as they were, pointed toward a single, horrifying conclusion: the chamber did not kill its victims. It changed them. Bent them. Extracted something from them. And sometimes, sent something back in their place. As the accounts continued to surface, one disturbing question grew impossible to ignore: if no one truly survived the ritual, then who, or what, was walking out of the chamber? For most of its history, the Church presented itself as an institution built on truth, compassion, and moral clarity. But the deeper investigators dug into the story of the veiled apostles, the more evident it became that the Church's greatest sin was not the ritual itself, it was the centuries-long effort to bury every trace of it. The sanctuary of St. Ilias was not merely an isolated aberration, it was a wound the Church stitched shut with secrecy, silence, and fear. The cover-up began the moment the first ritual ended in death. Instead of denouncing the apostles, Church officials quietly reclassified their activities as misguided zeal. Rather than intervene, they reassigned the monks who expressed concern. Over time, the apostles grew so intertwined with the monastery's internal structure that attempting to uproot them became politically dangerous. It was easier, safer, to pretend the chamber did not exist. One of the earliest documents proving the cover-up was a letter dated 1795, written by a bishop overseeing the region. In it, he warns a fellow clergyman, "The matter you speak of must not reach Rome. Such inquiries only strengthen the shadows and weaken the faithful." The bishop offered no help. He merely advised containment, a word that would echo through church correspondence for the next 2 centuries. As disappearances increased, concerned villagers sent petitions demanding investigations. Some even traveled to the nearest diocese, begging for intervention. But each appeal was met with bureaucratic dismissal. Claims were labeled folkloric exaggerations. Witnesses were chastised for spreading fear. The Church discouraged further discussion, insisting that rumor alone could corrupt spiritual trust. In reality, they were obstructing justice. By the mid-1800s, internal notes reveal that several Vatican committees were aware something was happening at St. Ilias. Their concern, however, was not for the victims, it was for the Church's reputation. One internal memo stated, "Any association between the Holy See and unauthorized ascetic practices risks catastrophic scandal." Rather than confront the apostles, the Church shifted its efforts to concealment. They controlled what was written, who could speak, and most importantly, who could investigate. Those who pressed too hard were quietly transferred, silenced, or discredited. A prime example came from 1868, when a young priest named Father Davern submitted a detailed report alleging that monks had been conducting dark initiations underground. He documented symbols, chants, and descriptions of the chamber he had heard from a frightened novice. His superiors responded not with alarm, but with punishment. Father Davern was excommunicated for heresy and unstable imagination. Shortly afterward, he disappeared. The Church never mentioned him again. Then there were the survivors, the returned, whose shattered minds threatened to expose the truth. Instead of receiving care, they were institutionalized in church-run hospitals, diagnosed as spiritually fractured, and kept under strict supervision. Their families were told they suffered from fever-induced madness. The apostles' influence was written out of their histories, replaced with invented illnesses or fabricated personal faults. One hospital ledger from 1897 describes a woman who exhibited compulsive symbol tracing and fear of darkness. The report concludes she was mentally disturbed by superstition. Yet the symbols she traced matched those carved in the chamber. The Church knew this. They simply chose to ignore it. By the early 1900s, the cover-up had evolved into a systematic structure. A dedicated classification code, frayed, was created for incidents related to St. Ilias. Documents carrying this mark were restricted to a handful of high-ranking officials. Many were stamped with the chilling directive, not to be copied. Not to be discussed. This was the era in which the apostles gained their greatest protection. With each passing decade, the chamber became less a physical location and more a phantom woven into church paranoia. Even those who did not support the apostles feared what exposure would unleash. The chamber was a stain no one wanted to acknowledge. Then came Father Aurelius Senko's investigation in the 1940s. His disappearance forced the Church to confront the fact that the apostles were still active. But instead of exposing the truth, officials once again prioritized damage control. Aurelius's reports were locked away. His disappearance was attributed to an accident, despite the obvious inconsistencies. His family was told he had chosen solitude. And the monks at St. Ilias were instructed never to speak his name again. This era produced some of the most disturbing cover-up documents ever uncovered. One classified memo, dated 3 days after Aurelius vanished, states, "Containment has failed. Further inquiry is forbidden. The chamber's guardians remain embedded. Disturbing them risks awakening what should remain dormant." What "awakening" meant was never clarified. But the tone suggested fear not of scandal, but of something far more tangible. As the 20th century progressed, the Church's public reforms painted a picture of transparency. Yet behind closed doors, the cover-up persisted. Files related to St. Ilias continued to disappear. Witnesses continued to recant. Archaeological requests to excavate the monastery were denied without explanation. The chamber remained sealed not just physically, but historically. Then, in the late 1990s, a whistleblower within the Vatican leaked portions of an internal review. Among the documents was a brief but chilling statement from a cardinal who had visited St. Ilias decades earlier: "The chamber has not been destroyed. Only sealed. Destruction was deemed too dangerous." This single line changed everything. For centuries, the world had assumed the chamber was myth. But this statement confirmed it still existed, untouched, intact, and potentially active. If the apostles had ceased their rituals, there was no official record of when or why. If they had perished, no one had documented their fall. And if they were still operating in shadows, no one knew who they were now, or what they wanted. The whistleblower's documents also revealed that the Church had commissioned secret evaluations of locations suspected to house similar chambers. 3 sites were identified. 2 were confirmed empty. 1, St. Ilias, was classified as indeterminate. The reviewers reported feeling watched during their visit. Their equipment malfunctioned. They heard faint humming beneath the chapel floor. Their final note was succinct and haunting: "If the apostles ever return, this is where they will begin." The Church buried the review. But the world had already begun to ask questions. And the answers, if they existed, lay deeper than anyone imagined. For centuries, the chamber beneath the sanctuary of St. Ilias existed only in whispers, hidden documents, and confidential memos buried deep within the Vatican archives. But in 2018, something happened that no one, neither the Church nor the villagers nor the few surviving scholars who still studied the veiled apostles, was prepared for. A team of archaeologists, working entirely independently of the Church, unintentionally unearthed what officials had spent generations trying to conceal. The excavation began innocently, as most tragedies do. A European cultural heritage project received funding to restore several historic monasteries in the region, including St. Ilias. The structure had suffered from erosion, earthquakes, and decades of neglect. Its walls had begun to crumble. Its underground sections were considered too dangerous for human entry. The goal was simple: stabilize the building to prevent further collapse. The project assigned a small team of archaeologists, engineers, and historians to survey the foundation. Among them was Dr. Lydia Mares, a respected archaeologist specializing in medieval religious structures. She had no knowledge of the monastery's darker past. No reason to suspect anything unusual. But from the moment she arrived, she sensed something was wrong. During the initial assessment, her instruments malfunctioned repeatedly, depth scanners showed impossible emptiness beneath solid stone, thermal readings fluctuated without explanation, and ground-penetrating radar produced a distorted, swirling pattern that none of the engineers could decipher. At first, they blamed outdated equipment. But even after replacing the devices, the readings remained the same. It was as if something beneath the chapel refused to be measured. While surveying the northern wing, the team discovered a section of floor that sounded hollow when struck. Dr. Lydia ordered careful excavation, expecting to find a forgotten storage space or water channel. Instead, after hours of careful digging, they uncovered a stone grate, ornate, carved with unfamiliar symbols, and positioned in a place no functional drain should exist. The grate was old. Older than the monastery. Older, perhaps, than Christianity itself. When they lifted it, a rush of cold air surged upward so violently that every lantern flickered out. The temperature dropped instantly. Their breath fogged. Someone whispered, "It feels like a cave exhaling." Beneath the grate was a narrow shaft descending into darkness. The walls were carved with markings identical to those described in forbidden church documents, symbols associated with the veiled apostles. Though no one in the team recognized the patterns, something about them felt wrong. Jagged. Unsettling. Designed not for decoration, but for purpose. Dr. Lydia documented the discovery and prepared to descend with a small team. Her official notes from that morning stated, "Unexplained architectural feature uncovered. Possible earlier cultic structure. Team proceeding with caution." Unaware that her words mirrored the warnings of those who had vanished before her. The team descended using ropes and headlamps. The shaft was narrow at first, barely wide enough for a person to pass. But after 20 meters, it opened into a vast underground passage, cold, silent, and lined with carvings so intricate they seemed to move under the shifting light. The air felt wrong. Thicker. Heavier. One of the engineers remarked that the silence felt engineered, as if sound itself was being swallowed by the stone. As they walked deeper, the passageways began to twist unnaturally, angles that defied architectural logic, walls that curved in directions that should have been impossible. Several team members began to feel disoriented. One fainted. Another complained of hearing faint whispers behind them, though no one else heard anything. They pressed on. Soon they reached a point where the tunnel split into 3. Dr. Lydia examined the walls and found a symbol carved repeatedly into the stone, a circle divided by a vertical line, with rays branching outward. She photographed it, not knowing it matched the symbol found centuries earlier in Brother Leon Vargas' cell. The team chose the left tunnel. And that was when the temperature plummeted. Their headlights flickered violently. Something in the darkness pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, as if the stone itself had a heartbeat. The farther they walked, the louder it became. Not a sound, exactly, but a vibration in the bone. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wide chamber. The chamber. It was unmistakable. The spiraling carvings, the uneven floor designed to disorient, the alcoves that looked like empty eye sockets watching from the walls. Dr. Lydia's breathing grew shallow as she stepped inside. She later described the feeling in her notes as, presence. Not the presence of a person. But something else. Something that had been waiting. Bones littered the floor, some human, some unidentifiable. Many bore strange etchings, deliberate markings carved into the surface. One of the engineers knelt to examine a skull and froze. The skull's jaw was locked open, as if its owner had died screaming. Another team member discovered long scratch marks on the floor, nail marks etched into the stone. They realized, too late, that the chamber was not abandoned. It had simply been silent. A camera operator named Marco started filming the chamber's interior. His footage showed strange distortions, shadows that did not match their bodies, movements in the corners that vanished when approached. Then, in a single haunting moment, the camera captured something unmistakable. A whisper. At first it seemed like static. But when slowed down, the audio revealed a voice, soft, deliberate, urgent. "Prove your worth." Marco dropped the camera. His hands shook violently. He insisted someone had spoken directly into his ear. But the chamber was empty. No one was near him. Moments later, the lights cut out. Total darkness. Not the natural darkness of unlit space, this was deeper, suffocating, as if light had been swallowed. Team members called out to one another, but their voices sounded muffled, distorted. Some claimed to feel breathing behind them. One person swore they felt a hand brush their shoulder. When the lights finally flickered back on, Marco was on the ground, unconscious, his pulse rapid, his face pale. He later said he saw figures in the dark, hooded silhouettes standing in a circle around them, chanting in a rhythm that felt ancient and wrong. The team fled the chamber, stumbling through the tunnels, desperate to reach the surface. As soon as they emerged, a representative of a government preservation agency ordered the excavation halted. Within 24 hours, all equipment was confiscated, all notes seized, all digital files deleted. The site was declared restricted. Dr. Lydia and her team were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements under threat of legal action. But not before Dr. Lydia managed to recover one corrupted audio clip. On it, a faint whisper echoed through the static, "Return." The modern world had awakened something buried for centuries. And whatever it was, whatever still lingered in the depths, it did not want to be forgotten. The discovery of the chamber should have ended the mystery. It should have forced the church to reveal everything it had hidden. But instead, something far stranger happened. Once the 2018 excavation team was silenced, new documents began leaking from within the Vatican, documents that exposed a truth even darker than anyone had imagined. The veiled apostles were not a rogue cult operating outside church authority. They had been sanctioned. Not openly, not officially, but secretly tolerated because they served a purpose far more calculated than divine judgment. The leaked documents included fragments of strategic memos from the 1700s to the late 1900s. At first glance, they were vague, discussions about selective purification, heresy containment, and ritual reinforcement. But when cross-referenced with testimony from survivors, forbidden journals, and architectural analyses of the chamber, a chilling understanding emerged. The apostles had not created the ritual for enlightenment. They created it for indoctrination. The church, struggling through centuries of political upheaval, schisms, and internal rebellion, feared dissent more than anything. The veiled apostles offered a solution, unspeakable, brutal, but effective. Anyone suspected of spreading ideas the church considered dangerous could be sent to St. Ilias under the pretense of spiritual evaluation. The ritual became a hidden weapon, a way to silence political rivals, critics, and problematic minds, without ever leaving evidence behind. One Vatican strategist described the ritual in a chilling memorandum: "Those who die leave no voice. Those who return leave no clarity. Both outcomes serve the order." This was not spiritual doctrine. This was control. The chamber's design, its sound distortions, psychological traps, sensory void, was never meant to test holiness. It was created to break a person so completely that their identity shattered long before their heart did. Every fear a person carried, every doubt, every memory, they all became weapons within those stone walls. The apostles believed that a broken soul could not resist truth if shaped correctly. But shaping rarely succeeded. Most died. Those who crawled out alive were too damaged to speak. And the church used their brokenness as proof of spiritual corruption, justifying their permanent disappearance. As more leaked files surfaced, it became clear that the chamber had been activated repeatedly across centuries, during political threats, rising reformist movements, or whenever dangerous thought became too widespread. The apostles saw themselves as guardians, not of faith, but of control. Yet the revelations did not end there. One document, older, handwritten, and stamped with a seal not used for any other church order, contained a detailed explanation of the ritual's original design. It revealed the most disturbing truth of all: the ritual was never meant to kill anyone. Its true purpose was to find someone who would survive. Not physically, spiritually. Someone who would emerge fully indoctrinated, emptied of resistance, and ready to lead the next generation of apostles. A successor. A vessel. But no one had ever survived long enough. And yet, the apostles kept trying. Another parchment, dated 1843, elaborated: "The chamber awaits the worthy. When he comes, the path will open beyond the walls." What "beyond the walls" meant remained unclear. Scholars interpreted it as metaphorical indoctrination, but others suspected something more literal, perhaps an inner chamber, a deeper sanctum hidden even from the apostles themselves. Then came the final leak, a sealed Vatican directive, unsigned, undated, but evidently written by someone with immense authority. Its tone was cold, procedural, and terrifyingly confident. The directive declared that the chamber represented an ancient mechanism of discernment, valuable for future use in selective spiritual testing. And the last line sent shockwaves through every historian who read it: the ritual is scheduled for re-evaluation in the new era. Prepare the chamber. The phrase, new era, sparked widespread speculation. Some believed it referred to modernization within the Church. Others thought it hinted at a resurgence of the apostles. But a few, studying the timeline, offered a more disturbing hypothesis: the directive was written shortly before the 2018 excavation. Meaning the Church already knew the chamber still existed. Meaning the accidental discovery may not have been an accident at all. Meaning the apostles, or those who inherited their purpose, may have been planning something. But even more troubling was what followed after that leaked directive. Reports from locals near St. Ilias indicated that, shortly after the excavation was shut down, strange activity resumed at night. Flickering lights inside the monastery. Shadows moving behind boarded windows. Low humming vibrations that traveled across the valley on cold evenings. One villager claimed he saw hooded figures carrying lanterns along the cliffside path, lanterns with symbols etched into the glass. Another reported hearing chanting from beneath the chapel floor. And a third insisted she saw someone, tall, thin, wearing old robes, walking into the monastery on a night when no one should have been there. The Church denied everything, of course. They always had. But when a journalist attempted to investigate the site in 2020, he was stopped by armed officials who claimed the monastery was under structural quarantine. His notes later revealed a chilling encounter with an unnamed official who told him, "You're asking questions about something that is not sleeping peacefully." For the first time in history, leaked documents, eyewitness accounts, and archaeological evidence all pointed toward the same horrifying truth: the chamber had not been abandoned. The ritual had not been forgotten. And someone, somewhere, believed its time was coming again.